Courthouse smelled like floor wax and finality. Serena sat at the table beside her attorney, her posture straight, her hands resting quietly in her lap. She'd chosen her outfit carefully that morning. A charcoal blazer, tailored pants, low heels, not because she wanted to impress anyone, because she wanted to remember this day clearly, and she wanted to look exactly like what she was, a woman who had already moved on. Across the aisle, her husband leaned toward the woman beside him and whispered something. The woman covered her mouth to suppress a laugh. Her name was Paige. She had long auburn hair and the kind of confidence that came from never having to work very hard for anything. She wore a white sundress to a divorce proceeding, which told Serena everything she needed to know about her. Judge Calloway adjusted his reading glasses and reviewed the final page of the settlement agreement. "The dissolution of marriage between Serena and Derek Holloway is hereby granted," he said. "All terms are final and binding. Court is adjourned." Derek's attorney shook his hand and said something low and reassuring. Derek himself looked relaxed, almost celebratory, like he'd just closed a deal he'd been working toward for months. Maybe he had. Serena signed her name one last time. Her signature didn't waver. She stood, smoothed the front of her blazer, and walked toward the exit. She didn't look at Derek. She didn't look at Paige. She had nothing left to say to either of them, and silence, she'd learned, was its own kind of power. Serena. Derek's voice followed her into the hallway. "Hey, hold on." She kept walking. Outside, the late morning sun was sharp and warm. The courthouse steps stretched down to a wide sidewalk lined with oak trees just beginning to turn gold. Serena descended slowly, one hand tracing the iron railing, breathing the outside air for the first time in what felt like hours. Derek and Paige came through the doors behind her. "Serena, come on." Derek jogged down 2 steps to keep pace with her. "We should talk about the storage unit and the car registration. There are still logistics." Serena reached the bottom of the steps and stopped. He took that as an invitation. Paige drifted beside him, her arm looped through his. Her expression caught somewhere between sympathy and satisfaction. "I just want to make sure you're going to be okay," she said. "Moving out of that house on your own, finding a new place, that's a lot. If you need help, honestly, just ask." Serena looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Then she looked at Derek. His jaw was set in that way it always got when he was trying to appear magnanimous. His suit was new. She'd seen the charge on the joint account last week. $540. He'd been careful not to mention it. She didn't say anything. A black SUV, the kind with no visible logo, tinted windows, and chrome door handles that caught the light like mirrors, turned the corner and pulled to the curb directly in front of her. It moved with the kind of quiet authority that expensive things always did. Derek's expression shifted. A woman stepped out from the driver's side. She was maybe 50, impeccably dressed in a graphite blazer and dark slacks, her silver-streaked hair pulled back cleanly. She moved around the vehicle with complete ease and opened the rear passenger door. "Ms. Vance," she said. "Ready when you are." Serena smiled. It was a real smile, the kind she hadn't worn in longer than she wanted to admit. "Thank you, Rochelle." She stepped into the back seat without hesitating. The interior was cream leather and dark walnut trim. A phone and a folder of documents waited on the seat beside her, along with a stainless travel mug she recognized from her own kitchen, the one she'd left at the office weeks ago. Rochelle had thought of everything. The door closed with a soft, solid sound. Rochelle returned to the driver's seat. The SUV pulled away from the curb in one smooth motion. Derek stood on the courthouse steps and watched it go. "Who is that?" Paige asked. "I don't know," Derek said. He said it quietly, and something about his tone made Paige look at him more carefully. "What do you mean you don't know? Was that a car service?" Derek didn't answer. He was still watching the corner where the SUV had turned. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A notification from his bank. The joint account they'd been ordered to separate by end of month currently held less than $800. He'd been counting on Serena to let things settle gradually, the way she always handled transitions, carefully, practically, without drama. He was beginning to understand that he might have misread her entirely. 3 years before the divorce, Serena Vance sat beside her father's hospital bed and held his hand while the room around them stayed very still. Raymond Vance had spent 42 years building Vance Agricultural Supply, a family operation that started with a single grain warehouse in central Indiana and grew into a regional distribution network covering 7 states. He'd been meticulous, patient, and almost aggressively humble about it. He drove a pickup truck with 200,000 miles on it. He wore the same brand of work boots for 30 years. He called Serena every Sunday morning and always asked about her in the same order: her sleep, her appetite, her work, and then, as if it were an afterthought, her happiness. He was dying of heart failure, and he wanted to make sure she understood something before he went. "The business passes to you," he said. His voice was thin but deliberate. "Not to Derek. Dad, I'm not saying he's a bad man." He paused to breathe. "I'm saying I don't know who he is. 8 years and I still don't know what he wants. A man who doesn't know what he wants will always want what someone else has." Serena's throat tightened. "That's not fair." "Maybe not." Her father's eyes were clear even now. "But the trust is structured. The business transfers to you and only you. He has no claim to it under Indiana law, especially if you keep the accounts separate." He squeezed her hand once firmly. "Promise me you'll talk to Howard before you do anything else." Howard Bates had been her father's attorney for 25 years. Serena had met him at every Thanksgiving growing up. "I promise," she said. Raymond Vance died 4 days later. Serena sat with him until the end. At the funeral, Derek complained twice about the drive. He'd wanted to take his car. She'd insisted on renting something large enough for the family, and he spent the return trip in the passenger seat with his jaw set and his eyes on his phone. She filed it away without comment. Howard Bates met with her 3 weeks after the funeral in his office downtown, the kind of office that hadn't changed its carpet since 1987 and was somehow more reassuring for it. He walked her through the trust line by line: the business, the land holdings, the equipment, the distribution contracts, a portfolio valued at just over $11 million. Serena sat very still during that meeting. "Your father kept this separate from your marital assets deliberately," Howard said. "As long as you don't commingle, don't deposit these funds into joint accounts, don't use them to pay shared expenses, Derek has no legal claim. Even if we divorce," Howard looked at her steadily. "Even then." Serena drove home and sat in her parked car in the driveway for almost 20 minutes. Inside, Derek was on the couch watching a game. He asked how it went without looking up. "Fine," she said. "Mostly paperwork." He nodded and turned back to the screen. She went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood at the counter thinking about her father's boots and his pickup truck and the way he'd said Derek's name in the hospital. Not with contempt, but with the careful neutrality of a man who'd made his decision and didn't need to defend it. She called Howard the next morning and asked for a referral to a business attorney who specialized in agricultural operations. His name was Franklin Wells, and he became the first person outside her family who knew what she was building. Serena had always had a head for numbers. It was why she'd gone into financial planning, why clients trusted her with their retirement accounts and their children's college funds. What she hadn't realized, until she inherited her father's business, was that she also had a head for land. The distribution network was already profitable, but the real estate attached to it, the warehouses, the acreage in 3 counties, the grain storage facilities, was significantly undervalued. With the right investment, it could be worth 3 times what it was on paper. She started quietly. She hired a property management firm. She brought in a consultant named Adrian who had spent 20 years restructuring family agricultural operations after inheritance. She began attending regional agribusiness conferences on weekends, telling Derek she was visiting her mother or catching up with old college friends. He never asked for specifics. That was the thing about Derek. He was incurious in a way that had once seemed easygoing. Now it just seemed like absence. She incorporated a holding company under her maiden name, Vance Land Holdings, and moved all the inherited assets into it. She kept a separate business account, separate correspondence, a separate P.O. box that Howard's office managed. By the end of the first year, Vance Land Holdings had added 2 new warehouse facilities and renegotiated contracts with 4 regional distributors, increasing annual revenue by 31%. Derek thought she was still a financial planner working long hours on a difficult client portfolio. The sign started in February. Derek began working late. That wasn't unusual. He was in commercial real estate, and deals had their own schedules. But the texture of his late nights changed. He started showering the moment he got home instead of after dinner. He bought new cologne that she didn't recognize, something woodsy and expensive that wasn't his usual brand. He started keeping his phone face down on every surface reflexively, the way people do when a habit has become automatic. Serena managed household finances. She always had. So she saw the credit card statement in March. A restaurant she'd never been to. Twice. A hotel downtown, $260 on a Tuesday, when Derek had said he was at a client dinner on the north side. A jewelry store charge for $480. She'd received no jewelry. She sat at the kitchen table with the statement in her hand for a long time. She didn't want to be wrong. She wanted there to be an explanation. So she said nothing and waited. The following month, she contacted a private investigator named Curtis Daly. He'd been referred by Franklin Wells, who handled enough family business disputes to keep a short list of people he trusted. Curtis was a former sheriff's deputy from Terre Haute, now in his late 50s, with a deliberate manner and no apparent interest in small talk. They met at a coffee shop 20 minutes from Serena's office. "I need to know if my husband is seeing someone," she said. "How long have you suspected?" 2 months. Give me 10 days. He needed 7. He called her on a Thursday afternoon. "I have documentation. Can you meet tomorrow?" The folder he slid across the table at their second meeting held photographs and printouts. Derek and a woman named Paige Donovan, a property coordinator at his firm, restaurants, a parking garage, the hotel, 3 separate occasions. "She works in his office," Curtis said. "Same floor. They've been seeing each other for approximately 6 months based on what I could trace." 6 months. Serena looked at the photographs steadily. She taught herself not to flinch. "There's more." Curtis produced a second set of pages. "His credit card charges over that period. I have a contact who could compile the records." He gave her a moment to review them. "He spent close to $18,000. Dinners, the hotel stays, a weekend trip to Nashville in January that he told you was a conference." January. She remembered January. She'd been in Indianapolis visiting Adrian about the warehouse expansion. She'd called Derek from her hotel room and he'd sounded distracted and said he missed her. He also, Curtis said carefully, applied for a personal credit card in March that isn't in your joint name. The balance is currently just over $6,000. Serena set the papers down. She drove home that evening and went straight to her home office. She pulled up her financial planning software and ran the numbers she already knew by heart. Dance Land Holdings, $14 million in assets, growing. Monthly operating income from the properties, $68,000. Her personal investment accounts, seeded carefully over 3 years from her salary and business distributions, just over $2 million. She had options. More options than Derek had ever imagined she had. She called her attorney, a woman named Joyce Whitfield who had built one of the most respected family law practices in the state and who wore silk blouses and spoke in complete, devastating sentences. "I'm ready to file," Serena said. "I want to make sure he gets nothing that isn't his," Joyce said. "Then let's make sure of it." While Derek continued his routine, the late nights, the hidden phone, the cologne Serena had learned to recognize as the smell of his choices, she built her case with the same patience she'd applied to everything else. Joyce reviewed the prenuptial agreement they'd signed before the wedding. Derek had pushed for it, actually. He'd had more in savings at the time and wanted to protect his assets in the event things didn't work out. Serena had agreed without much discussion. She hadn't thought she'd need it to protect herself. Now she was grateful for every clause. Joyce cross-referenced the business structure with Howard Bates and confirmed that Dance Land Holdings was fully protected as inherited separate property. The marital home was the one complicated asset. They'd both contributed to the mortgage, but Serena had documentation showing her contributions had exceeded Derek's by nearly 2 to 1 over the past 3 years. She purchased a condominium in a building her company managed. 4th floor, corner unit with tall windows and a kitchen she designed herself. She had it furnished quietly over the course of 2 months. Delivery scheduled during weekday afternoons when Derek was at work. She packed her personal belongings on a Sunday in October while Derek was at the gym. Clothes, her mother's china, her grandmother's quilt, the framed photograph of her and her father at the grain warehouse when she was 11 years old. She left her key on the kitchen counter and didn't look back. Derek arrived home to an empty closet and a note from his attorney. Joyce had filed that morning. He called Serena 41 times over the next 4 days. She didn't answer. The settlement conference took place in Joyce's office, a corner suite on the 14th floor with clean modern furniture and a wall of windows that made everyone on the other side of the table feel slightly exposed. Derek arrived with his attorney, a man named Patrick who had an expensive haircut and a vaguely uncertain energy that Serena clocked immediately. "Let's begin," Joyce said, opening her portfolio. Patrick leaned forward. "My client believes the marital home should be valued and split equally, and that certain business assets should be addressed according to the terms of the signed prenuptial agreement," Joyce finished. She slid a copy across the glass table. "Your client signed this document in April 2016. It was reviewed by independent counsel. It's enforceable. My client contends the business grew substantially during the marriage, from inherited assets and separately managed funds. Not a single dollar of marital income was used in the capitalization or operations of Vance Land Holdings. We have 7 years of bank records. Joyce produced a bound document. The accounts were never commingled, not once. Derek's jaw was tight. I didn't even know about that company until recently. That's correct, Joyce said. You didn't, because it was Serena's separate property and she had no legal obligation to disclose it. Just as you had no legal obligation to disclose your personal credit card, which, by the way, we are aware of. Patrick whispered something to Derek. The marital home, Joyce continued. Ms. Myers, all? Vance contributed 63% of mortgage payments over the past 3 years, documented here. Given the disparity and the circumstances, we're seeking full transfer of the property to Ms. Vance. You'll have 30 days to vacate. 30 days! Derek's voice went flat. Where am I supposed to go? That isn't a question for this room. What about the joint accounts? Current balance is approximately $1,900 after your recent discretionary spending. Joyce's tone didn't change. Split equally, you each receive $950. We're also seeking reimbursement for the $18,000 charged to the joint credit card during your relationship with Paige Donovan. Hotel accommodations, restaurant charges, the Nashville trip in January, miscellaneous gifts. Patrick started to object. Miscellaneous gifts. Joyce placed the credit card statements and Curtis Daly's documentation on the table. Derek looked at the photographs. His face went still. However, Joyce said, Ms. Vance is prepared to waive the reimbursement claim entirely under one condition. You sign the final decree today. No contact, no appeals, no contesting of any asset classification. A clean separation. And if I don't sign, then we file the full documentation in open court. Your employer will have access to evidence that you used company time and company resources, his work calendar, his office email system to coordinate this relationship. Your professional standing is your concern, not ours. But you should factor it in. Patrick leaned close to Derek and spoke quietly for almost a full minute. Derek picked up the pen. His hand moved across the page and his signature appeared on the line. Less decisive than Serena's, slightly uneven, as if his hand wasn't entirely committed to what it was doing. Serena signed below it without looking at him. Court will finalize in 60 days, Joyce said. Mr. Holloway, the 30-day clock on the property starts today. Derek stood without a word and walked out. Patrick gathered his files and followed, pausing at the door to give Joyce a small, acknowledging nod. When they were gone, Joyce closed her portfolio and looked across the table. How are you feeling? Honest answer? Always. Like I've been holding my breath for 2 years, Serena said, and I can finally exhale. 14 months after the divorce was finalized, Serena stood in a converted farmhouse in central Indiana, facing an audience of agricultural investors, regional business leaders, and 3 state legislators who had driven 2 hours to attend the Vance Land Holdings annual stakeholder presentation. The building had been her father's original grain warehouse. She'd spent 8 months having it restored. Original timber beams, poured concrete floors, walls of industrial glass that let in the afternoon light at an angle that made everything look like it was worth keeping. She stood at the front of it in a linen blazer the color of warm wheat, her hair loose, her notes barely touched. My father believed that land was the most honest thing a person could own, she told the room. It doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't renegotiate the terms after you've already committed. She paused. The same can't always be said for people. There was quiet laughter. There were people in that room who knew her story, or pieces of it. She'd stopped minding. She walked them through the portfolio. 16 properties across 4 states, 2 new cold storage facilities completed that spring, a partnership with a regional grocery cooperative that had increased distribution revenue by 40%, total asset value, $22 million, with a projected growth trajectory that had 3 institutional investors in the front row sitting forward in their chairs. After the presentation, during the reception in the courtyard, a man approached her who she didn't immediately recognize. He was perhaps 45, with a quiet self-possession that stood out in a room full of people performing confidence. He wore a jacket over an open collar and held a glass of sparkling water. Serena Vance? He extended his hand. Theo Caldwell. I run Caldwell Harvest Partners out of Louisville. We focus on sustainable food systems infrastructure. She knew the name. Caldwell Harvest had been written about in 2 of the trade journals she read on Sunday mornings. They'd recently completed a $30 million regional food hub in Kentucky that was being cited as a model for rural economic development. "I'm familiar with your work," she said, "and I'm familiar with your father built something remarkable. What you've done with it is a different kind of remarkable." He tilted his head slightly. "I'd like to talk to you about a project we're developing in the Ohio Valley. We're looking for a partner with deep roots in agricultural infrastructure. Someone who understands the land, not just the numbers." "What kind of partnership?" "Operational equity, not just capital decision-making. I don't need an investor. I need someone who cares what the land becomes." Serena studied him for a moment. He met her gaze without filling the silence. "Send me the details," she said. "I'll review them this week." They exchanged cards. As he turned to speak with someone else, Adrian appeared at Serena's elbow with a glass of sparkling cider. "Was that Theo Caldwell?" "It was. The Theo Caldwell?" "It was. The Theo Caldwell?" His company turned down a partnership with 2 hedge funds last year because they wanted to convert productive farmland to solar farms. He said no, which, in my world, is practically canonization. "Adrian, I'm just observing." Over the following weeks, Serena reviewed Caldwell Harvest's Ohio Valley proposal with the same careful attention she gave everything. The project was a regional food processing and distribution center, a hub that would serve 60 independent farms within a 100-mile radius, providing infrastructure that none of them could afford individually. The numbers were sound. The mission aligned with what her father had always believed, that a business was only as stable as the community it came from. She and Theo spoke twice by phone to discuss the terms. Those conversations were focused and efficient, and somehow also easy, the way conversations are with people who don't need to perform intelligence because they're actually in possession of it. She agreed to the partnership. They began working together in January. Site visits, planning meetings, calls that started about drainage easements and ended up, somehow, on the subject of their fathers. Theo had lost his mother young. He'd been raised primarily by a grandmother who kept a garden and told him the names of every plant in it. "She said you can't take care of something you don't know the name of," he told Serena during one long call. "I think about that a lot in this work. My father used to say, 'Land doesn't lie,'" Serena said. A short pause. "I'd have liked your father." She didn't respond right away. Out the window of her condo, the city lights reflected on a thin layer of early spring snow. "He would have made you prove yourself first," she finally said. "Good," Theo said. "I'd want him to." The Ohio Valley groundbreaking took place in April, and Theo flew in for the event. They walked the site together in the morning before the ceremony, boots muddy, talking about soil composition and the history of the county. At the ceremony itself, he stood slightly behind her during her remarks and didn't try to share the microphone. Afterwards, standing in the field with the last of the crew, he said simply, "You're good at this." "I had good teachers, more than that." He looked at her steadily. "You care. It shows in how you talk about it. Some people in this industry talk about it. Some people in this industry talk about land like it's a product. You talk about it like it's a responsibility." Serena looked out over the turned earth, the stakes and survey flags, the beginning of something that hadn't existed 6 months ago. "My ex-husband used to tell me I worked too much," she said. He meant it as a criticism. "He was wrong," Theo said simply. She glanced at him. He wasn't trying to comfort her, he was just saying what he thought, the way people do when they're not managing your feelings for you. She found that unexpectedly steadying. "Would you have dinner with me?" he asked. "Not a work dinner, just dinner." She considered it for exactly as long as she needed to. Yes, they had dinner at a small place in Louisville that didn't take reservations and served everything on mismatched plates. Theo wore jeans and showed up 3 minutes early. They talked for 4 hours. When he watched her to her car, he didn't try to extend the night. He just said he'd like to do it again, and she said she would too, and that was enough. Derek's collapse didn't happen all at once. It happened the way Serena had watched certain farms fail, gradually and then suddenly, season by season, until the neglect became impossible to ignore. He'd moved in with Paige after vacating the house. The arrangement lasted 5 weeks. Paige, it turned out, had imagined something different than a man carrying secondhand furniture into her apartment and asking her to split the internet bill. She'd moved on by Thanksgiving, leaving a terse note and no forwarding address. Derek took a rental in a complex near his office. His demotion came a month later, a human resources review of workplace conduct that Patrick had failed to adequately prepare him for. His title dropped. His salary dropped with it. He searched for Serena online the way people do when they're trying to understand where they went wrong. He found the press release about the stakeholder event, then the regional business profile, then the article in a Midwestern agricultural trade publication titled Second Generation Thinking: How One Daughter is Reshaping Her Father's Legacy. There was a photograph of Serena at the Ohio Valley groundbreaking. She was standing on turned earth in mud-caked boots and a barn jacket, laughing at something off camera. She looked exactly like herself. That was the part that stayed with him, not her success, though that was substantial, but the way she looked in that photograph, like someone who had found the exact place she was supposed to be. He'd once told her she took herself too seriously. He sat with that memory for a long time. The annual Land Stewardship Dinner was the region's largest agricultural philanthropic event. 500 guests, formal attire, a keynote address from a sitting state senator. Vance Land Holdings had funded 3 of the evening's scholarship awards. Serena was presenting them. She arrived with Theo. She wore a deep burgundy dress with a clean silhouette, her grandmother's pearl earrings, and flat shoes because she would be on her feet for 3 hours, and she'd made her peace with pragmatism. Derek was working the coat check. He'd taken the job through a staffing agency 2 months ago, temporary service work while he waited for a permanent position to come through. It was the kind of work that made a person feel invisible, which was, he was beginning to understand, different from being invisible. He didn't see Serena until she was already standing at the coat check window. She handed him her claim ticket without appearing to register him. Then she looked up. A moment passed. Her expression didn't change. There was no satisfaction in it, no sharp intake of breath. She looked at him the way you might look at a street you used to live on, briefly, with mild recognition, and then with a readiness to move on. She took her coat. She started to turn away, then stopped. She reached into her coat pocket and placed something on the counter between them, a folded bill, a 10. "For your trouble," she said quietly. Not cruel, not warm, just said. She walked toward the exit where Theo was waiting, holding the door open with one hand and her wrap with the other. He said something that made her laugh. They went through the door and into the cold night air, and the door closed behind them. Derek stood at the coat check window holding the $10 bill. The next guests had already stepped up with their tickets and he had to move. He folded the bill and put it in his pocket and kept working. Later, Serena sat beside Theo in her car outside the venue. Shoes off, heat running, the last of the evening's energy slowly settling. He was there, Theo said. Not a question. Yes. The coat check? Yes. Theo didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Are you okay?" Serena thought about it honestly. I saw him and felt nothing really. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Just, he used to be the most significant thing in my life and now he's just a man I used to know. She looked out at the parking lot, the lights, the other guests filtering out in pairs. That took me a long time to get to. I used to think I'd feel something dramatic, vindicated, or sad, or, she shook her head. And instead, I felt like I had somewhere to be, she said. I still had the scholarship presentation. And you were waiting, and I just wanted to get back to what was real. Theo was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across and took her hand in his, simply, without ceremony. She let herself lean her head back against the seat and close her eyes for just a moment, listening to the sound of the heat and the city and the comfortable silence between two people who have figured out that they don't need to fill the space. She thought about her father, about the warehouse now full of light and conversation, about the Ohio Valley field in early April, stakes in the ground, everything still possible. But the photograph on her desk, of 2 people she'd loved her whole life, her father and her grandmother, standing in front of the first grain elevator, squinting into the sun, not yet knowing how much they would build. She thought about Derek, somewhere in this same city, folding other people's coats. She felt nothing toward him that required a name. That was the end of it, she realized. Not the signing of the papers, not the moving truck, not even the scholarship presentation with her name on the program. It was this, sitting in a warm car beside someone steady, thinking about work she loved, and finding that her ex-husband's entire story fit into exactly 3 seconds of her evening before her mind moved on to something that mattered. The best revenge, her father had once told her, was a well-kept field. He'd meant it practically. But she understood it differently now, that you didn't build something great to make someone else feel small. You built it because it was worth building. Because the land was there and the work was there and you were there, and that was enough. She opened her eyes. "Ready to go?" Theo asked. "Yes," Serena said, and she meant it in every sense of the word.